By 2026, more than 5 million digital records in New Zealand could legally be accessed or monitored under expanding government powers, and most people have no idea it's coming. Sound extreme? That's exactly what many legal experts are warning about right now. Laws quietly being debated today could soon decide what you can say online, how your money is tracked, and even whether your digital identity belongs to you or the state. And here's the shocking part. You don't have to live in New Zealand for these laws to affect you. If you use social media, digital payments, cloud storage, or travel internationally, you may already be connected. Governments often introduce big changes during times of fear, crises, climate emergencies, online harm, or public safety threats, and once these powers exist, they rarely disappear. The question is not if these laws will change daily life, it's how much freedom people are willing to give up without noticing. Stay with me until the end, because one of these upcoming laws could impact you sooner than you think, and once it's enforced, there may be no turning back. Number 10. Social media age and access limits. Imagine waking up one day and discovering that your favorite social media platform now requires age verification, identity checks, or even has time limits enforced by law. That's not science fiction. It's a real discussion happening as New Zealand moves towards stricter social media regulations by 2026. The proposed laws aim to protect children and teenagers from online harm, addiction, and mental health issues, but critics warn the impact could reach far beyond just minors. Research already shows that excessive social media use is linked to anxiety, depression, and reduced attention span, especially among young users. Governments argue that limiting access and enforcing age checks could reduce these harms. On paper, it sounds reasonable, but in practice, this could mean mandatory ID verification, biometric checks, or linking your social accounts to a digital identity system. Suddenly, scrolling, posting, or commenting may no longer be anonymous. For parents, this law might feel like relief, more control, safer platforms, fewer risks. But for creators, influencers, and everyday users, it raises serious concerns about privacy, data security, and censorship. Who stores this sensitive data? How long is it kept? And what happens if it's breached? These systems don't just affect kids, they reshape how everyone interacts online. There's also a global angle. When one developed country implements such laws, others often follow. What starts in New Zealand could quickly spread to Australia, Europe, and beyond, setting a new international standard for online behavior. The real question is whether these rules will protect users or quietly normalize digital surveillance under the banner of safety.
Number 9. Property and housing regulations. New Zealand's housing market has been under intense pressure for years, and by 2026, property and housing regulations are expected to become even stricter. The government's goal sounds simple: make homes more affordable for locals. But the methods being discussed could reshape who is allowed to buy, rent, or invest in property, and the ripple effects may be felt far beyond New Zealand's borders. At the center of these changes are limits on foreign property ownership, tougher rules for investors, and expanded controls on rental prices. Studies show that unrestricted speculation can drive housing costs higher, pushing young families and first-time buyers out of the market. Supporters of these laws argue that restricting outside investment could stabilize prices and return housing to its original purpose, a place to live, not a financial weapon. However, the reality is more complex. Overseas citizens, expatriates, and small investors may find themselves locked out overnight. New rules could require citizenship verification, long residency periods, or government approval before purchase is allowed. Rental regulations may also limit how much landlords can charge or how often rents can increase, which could reduce supply if investors pull out entirely. For everyday people, this could mean fewer rental options, longer waiting lists, and stricter tenant screening. For international investors, it sends a clear message: property ownership is no longer guaranteed. And once such laws are established, they rarely stop at one country. Similar housing controls are already spreading across Canada, the UK, and parts of Europe, making this a global trend to watch closely. The deeper concern is precedent. When governments gain the power to decide who can own property and under what conditions, it redefines the idea of ownership itself. Housing may become more regulated than ever before, and for millions, the dream of owning a home could quietly slip further out of reach.
Number 8. Emergency powers during crises. Emergency laws are often introduced with good intentions to protect lives during pandemics, natural disasters, or national security threats. But by 2026, New Zealand is expected to expand or formalize emergency powers that could give the government broader authority during future crises. These laws are designed to allow fast action when time is critical. Yet history shows that temporary powers have a habit of becoming permanent. During recent global crises, research revealed that emergency measures were effective in slowing harm and maintaining order. Lockdowns, movement restrictions, and mandatory compliance saved lives in many cases. However, these same studies also warn about long-term effects on civil liberties, especially when emergency rules lack clear end dates. Under proposed frameworks, authorities could restrict travel, limit public gatherings, enforce digital tracking, or mandate compliance with health or safety directives, all without the usual level of parliamentary debate. For everyday citizens, this means normal rights could be paused at a moment's notice. Businesses might be forced to close, digital passes could become mandatory, and non-compliance may carry serious penalties. The most concerning part is not the power itself, but who decides when a crisis begins and when it ends. If the definition of emergency becomes too broad, extraordinary control could be triggered more frequently than people expect. There's also a psychological impact. Studies show that populations exposed to repeated emergency measures may slowly normalize restrictions, accepting them as part of daily life. What once felt shocking can quickly become routine. And when citizens grow accustomed to oversight and control, reversing those systems becomes extremely difficult. The bigger picture extends beyond New Zealand. Many countries are watching each other closely, borrowing legal frameworks during times of uncertainty. If expanded emergency powers prove effective and unchallenged, they could become a global model, quietly reshaping the balance between public safety and personal freedom for generations to come. Number 7. Online misinformation and AI content control. As artificial intelligence and social media evolve at lightning speed, New Zealand is moving towards stricter controls on online misinformation and AI-generated content by 2026. The concern is real. Deepfakes, synthetic voices, and viral false information can spread faster than facts, influencing elections, markets, and public trust. Studies already show that people are far more likely to believe false content when it appears realistic or emotionally charged, exactly what modern AI is designed to create. Under proposed frameworks, platforms may be legally required to detect, label, limit, or remove AI-generated content deemed misleading or harmful. This could include altered videos, AI-written news, or even satirical posts that resemble real events. On the surface, this sounds like a necessary step to protect society. But the challenge lies in who decides what counts as misinformation and how quickly that decision is enforced. For creators, journalists, and educators, these rules could dramatically change how content is produced and shared. Automated filters may flag videos or posts before a human ever reviews them. Legitimate opinions, investigative reporting, or emerging scientific debates could be restricted simply because they challenge official narratives. Once AI systems are used to police other AI systems, errors and overreach become almost inevitable. There's also the issue of transparency. If content is suppressed or accounts are penalized, users may never fully understand why. Studies on algorithmic moderation show that lack of explanation reduces trust and increases self-censorship. People begin to avoid discussing complex or controversial topics altogether, even when those discussions are lawful. Globally, governments are watching closely. If New Zealand successfully implements AI content control laws, similar systems may spread rapidly across other countries. The long-term risk is a digital environment where information is filtered before citizens can evaluate it themselves, quietly redefining free expression in the age of artificial intelligence.
Number 6. Climate compliance and carbon penalties. By 2026, New Zealand is expected to tighten climate compliance laws and carbon penalties, pushing individuals and businesses to drastically change how they live, travel, and operate. These laws are driven by climate research, showing that rising emissions directly contribute to extreme weather, sea level rise, and economic instability. On the surface, the goal is clear: reduce carbon output and protect future generations. But the way these policies are enforced could deeply affect everyday life. Under expanding climate regulations, higher carbon taxes, fuel penalties, and emissions reporting may become unavoidable. Driving petrol vehicles could become significantly more expensive, while businesses may be required to track and report their carbon footprint in detail. Studies suggest that pricing carbon can reduce emissions, but they also reveal an unintended effect: higher living costs, especially for lower-income households who have fewer alternatives. For farmers and small businesses, the pressure may be even greater. Agriculture, a key part of New Zealand's economy, could face strict methane limits, production caps, or compliance fees. This could raise food prices and force many smaller operators out of the market. While large corporations can absorb these costs, individuals often cannot, creating a growing gap between policy goals and social reality. There is also concern about enforcement. Digital tracking systems, smart meters, and emissions monitoring tools may be used to measure compliance automatically. Once behavior is monitored digitally, penalties can be issued instantly, leaving little room for explanation or appeal. Critics argue this turns environmental responsibility into constant surveillance of daily choices. Globally, climate laws are increasingly linked across borders. What begins as national policy can quickly influence international trade, travel, and standards. As climate compliance becomes mandatory rather than voluntary, the debate shifts from protecting the planet to a deeper question: how much control over personal behavior is society willing to accept in the name of sustainability? Number 5. Tougher immigration and visa screening. By 2026, New Zealand is preparing to introduce tougher immigration and visa screening laws, reshaping who can enter, stay, or work in the country. These changes are being driven by concerns over housing shortages, job competition, public services pressure, and national security. While governments argue that stricter screening ensures stability, critics warn that the process may become more intrusive than ever before. Under proposed rules, visa applicants could face expanded background checks, including detailed employment histories, health records, and even reviews of online activity. Studies already show that many countries are turning to digital risk assessments, using algorithms to evaluate applicants before a human officer ever reviews the case. This means one misunderstood post, association, or data error could silently impact an application.
For international students and skilled workers, these laws could raise the bar significantly. Longer processing times, higher fees, and stricter compliance requirements may become the norm. Migrants could also be subject to ongoing monitoring after arrival, including work restrictions or mandatory reporting. Supporters say this protects the local workforce, but opponents argue it creates a system of constant uncertainty and conditional belonging. Tourists may also feel the impact. Short-term visitors could be asked to provide more documentation, travel histories, or biometric data before boarding a flight. Even transit passengers might fall under expanded screening rules. The idea of crossing borders freely becomes less about travel and more about data approval. What makes this especially important is the global pattern. Immigration systems around the world are increasingly interconnected, sharing databases and screening methods. If New Zealand adopts stricter digital vetting, similar systems may spread internationally. Over time, borders may shift from physical checkpoints to invisible digital filters, quietly deciding who gets to move and who doesn't, long before they ever reach the airport.
Number 4. Cash restrictions and tracked payments. By 2026, New Zealand could move much closer to a cash-limited society, where digital and trackable payments become the default for everyday life. Governments argue that reducing cash helps fight money laundering, tax evasion, and organized crime, and research does show that digital transactions are easier to monitor and audit. But as cash fades, so does one of the last forms of financial privacy. Under proposed changes, businesses may be encouraged or even required to accept only digital payments for certain services. Large cash transactions could face strict limits, mandatory reporting, or outright bans. Every purchase, transfer, or donation would leave a digital trail, permanently recorded and potentially accessible to authorities or financial institutions. While this increases transparency, it also raises serious concerns about who controls that data and how it is used. For everyday people, the impact could be immediate. Those without reliable access to banking, smartphones, or digital literacy, including the elderly and low-income communities, may struggle to participate fully in the economy. Small vendors and informal workers could lose flexibility, while fees from payment processors quietly eat into earnings. Studies show that fully digital systems tend to centralize power within banks and payment platforms, reducing consumer choice. There is also the issue of control. When money is entirely digital, it can be frozen, delayed, restricted, or programmed. In extreme cases, access to funds could be limited during disputes, investigations, or emergencies. What once required physical enforcement can now happen instantly with a few clicks. Globally, the move toward cashless systems is accelerating. Countries are watching each other closely, adopting similar frameworks. If New Zealand formalizes cash restrictions, it may signal a future where spending is not just a personal choice, but a monitored activity, reshaping the relationship between individuals, money, and the state. Number 3. Mandatory digital ID systems. By 2026, New Zealand is expected to expand the use of mandatory digital ID systems, transforming how people access services, prove identity, and interact with both government and private platforms. Digital IDs are promoted as a solution to fraud, identity theft, and inefficiency. Studies show that centralized digital identification can reduce paperwork and speed up verification. But the deeper concern lies in how much personal data is collected and who ultimately controls it. Under these systems, a single digital identity could be required to access healthcare, banking, travel services, education, and even social media platforms. Instead of showing multiple documents, citizens may rely on one centralized digital profile containing biometric data, address history,
financial records, and online activity markers. While convenient, this creates a powerful data hub that, if misused or breached, could expose millions at once. For everyday users, the risk is not just hacking, it's dependency. If access to a digital ID is suspended, expired, or flagged incorrectly, individuals could find themselves locked out of essential services overnight. Research into digital identity rollouts shows that errors disproportionately affect marginalized groups, leading to delays, appeals, and loss of access with little human oversight. There is also the issue of scope creep. Systems introduced for limited purposes often expand quietly over time. What begins as optional verification can become mandatory for daily activities. Once a digital ID is required everywhere, opting out becomes nearly impossible without opting out of society itself. Internationally, digital ID frameworks are being closely studied and replicated. If New Zealand successfully implements a mandatory system, it may encourage broader adoption across other countries. The long-term implication is profound. Identity shifts from something you possess to something that is granted, monitored, and managed, redefining personal autonomy in the digital age. Number 2. Stronger hate speech and online content regulations. By 2026, New Zealand is expected to enforce stricter hate speech and online content regulations, targeting harmful, offensive, or misleading speech across digital platforms. The government's stated goal is to protect communities from online abuse, harassment, and radicalization, which is supported by research showing that unchecked hate speech can lead to real-world violence and social unrest. However, the challenge lies in balancing protection with freedom of expression, and critics warn that the laws could have far-reaching consequences for everyday communication. Under the proposed regulations, platforms and users could face fines or legal action for posting content that is deemed harmful, even if the intention is satire, debate, or commentary. Studies on content moderation highlight that automated systems often misclassify speech, flagging legitimate discussions while failing to catch subtle harassment. This creates a landscape where digital expression is constantly monitored, filtered, and potentially restricted. For creators, journalists, and everyday users, the implications are significant. Posting controversial opinions or critical commentary could result in warnings, account suspension, or even legal consequences. The laws may require social media companies to actively monitor, remove, or label content, placing much of the decision-making in the hands of private platforms with their own biases and policies. This blurs the line between government regulation and corporate control over speech. There is also a psychological effect to consider. Research shows that overregulation can lead to self-censorship, where people avoid discussing certain topics or sharing information out of fear of repercussions. This could stifle public debate, academic discourse, and the natural exchange of ideas that societies rely on to evolve. The larger concern is global influence. New Zealand's approach to online content regulation could become a model for other countries, quietly shaping international norms on speech, expression, and digital behavior, with long-lasting effects on personal freedom and online culture. Number 1. Expanded digital surveillance powers. By 2026, New Zealand is expected to expand digital surveillance powers, giving authorities unprecedented access to emails, messages, social media activity, and online behavior. While governments argue that these measures are essential for national security, crime prevention, and public safety, critics warn that they could fundamentally alter the balance between privacy and control. Studies consistently show that increased monitoring can deter crime, but they also highlight significant risks of abuse, errors, and overreach when surveillance powers are too broad. Under the proposed expansions, authorities could potentially access metadata, communications content, and even encrypted messages with minimal oversight. Individuals using cloud services, messaging apps, or social platforms may find their activity tracked and stored in government databases. For many, this raises a critical question. How private is your digital life when nearly every click, post, or message could be monitored? The impact on citizens could be profound. Even ordinary online behavior, commenting on forums, posting on social media, or using financial apps, might be flagged, analyzed, or scrutinized. Research indicates that awareness of surveillance can alter behavior, creating a chilling effect where people self-censor or avoid certain topics, fearing legal consequences or government attention. Businesses, especially tech companies and startups, could face stricter compliance requirements, needing to provide access to customer data or build systems that enable monitoring. This could slow innovation and increase operational costs, particularly for small and medium enterprises. The broader concern is precedent. Once expanded surveillance powers are in place, they rarely retract fully. If New Zealand implements these laws, it could influence other nations considering similar measures, gradually reshaping global norms around privacy, civil liberties, and what it means to have a private digital life in the modern world. Over time, monitoring that begins as protection may quietly become a permanent feature of daily life. The laws we've discussed, from digital surveillance to social media limits, aren't just abstract rules on paper. They have the power to reshape daily life, personal freedoms, and privacy for millions, both in New Zealand and potentially around the world. Staying informed is no longer optional. It's essential to understand how these changes could touch your life, finances, and digital identity. If this video opened your eyes, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated on global laws that could affect you. Comment below which law worries you the most and why.